When I'm in the car and I'm driving along the road, the motorway, and then I just look at all the different trees which could be producing fruit, or the hedgerows where there could be things growing, and I just think there's so much land where we could be producing food. And my friend and I, we've had an idea where in my garden I have three apple trees actually, and a pear tree, but I have so much fruit that I can't eat it all.
Sure.
I do what I can with it,
Oh,
but
yeah.
we've come up with an idea where we're going to do like a fruit share. So the fruit that we've got, we are going to give to people in our area, and if they've got something that they've got surplus of, they'll give to us for free. So we're going to share the fruit.
Yes.
Yes, or
absolutely.
vegetables, whichever. If people have got too much of,
Sure.
so we can give it away.
I think it's amazing how inefficient the growth of vegetation growth is in smaller communities, because you will find that everyone I've ever known that has pear trees and apple trees, they have a bunch of waste.
Exactly.
It's like you just can't even eat it all. There's just so much of it.
We're going to start a project.
That's
I don't
great.
know how we're going to do it. We're going to find somewhere once a week and take what fruit we've got through the growing season, through the autumn, and just take it and share it.
Yes.
And people can bring something back in return if they want to, if they have something.
Sure.
But I don't mind just giving it away rather than it just being
absolutely.
dumped in the bin.
And back to the point that I made in the presentation earlier about the deliberate withholding of efficiency, that's exactly what the whole of society does. We have, it's, you know, for example, in the Great Depression, factories couldn't sell like milk. Instead of giving it to the people, they would just dump it all into the gutter.
I just hate things like that. In our area, for example, there is a fantastic group comes around and they do collect surplus fruit, and they're called Organically, and they take it and they give it out to community projects for free to, well, sort of people who can't afford too much food. So I think that's fantastic.
Yes.
I don't know if you have anything like that where you are.
There are similar smaller programs, and the effect is, of course, it's altruistic and beautiful, but the effect is so minimal. That's the unfortunate aspect of all of this, is that our activism at this stage, it can only go so far because of the established institutions that are in power. You know, if an organization can't get enough money to do something because they're not making a profit, even if they're, quote, non-profit in the distinction that you have in the United States, they have an inherent limitation because, and of course, the more profit they get, this sort of paradox, they become established, and then it becomes corrupt very often. So it's an unfortunate side effect. There's a lot of brilliant volunteerism that happens all over the world, but it's not enough. Again, back to the other point, you know, people donate small amounts of money to UNICEF and all of these organizations that promote, that go against poverty, and that's just the wrong idea. The idea is to make a structure to get them the food and the things that they need.
And to make them self-sufficient as well.
Yes, and to pull them out of that and put them into and create a society and a system that works. There's no reason for any of the poverty
like
that we see.
hydroponics.
Absolutely.
Yes.
You know, hydroponic agriculture can be applied anywhere. Unfortunately, it's very expensive now because it's a technical thing.
Yes.
But the resources aren't complex. It's really not a complex process. I've seen hydroponic farms. You could have hydroponics in the desert. In certain deserts, you have to have a straight down to the desert. Exactly. Excuse me, to the water table.
Yes.
And I mean, it might be difficult. I think the Sahara, if I remember correctly, has a water table that's accessible.
Okay.
So there might be some deserts that it might be, again, but it's all a matter of degree and technology. If you have to go down a mile, that might seem dramatic, but if you can do it,
and
what's the problem?
Thousands of people, it's worth it.
Yes, of course. I don't even think you need to have that type of extremity. The industrialized world could easily, on top of what it produces now, produce enough to feed, clothe, and house every person in the unindustrialized nations. It's just a matter of the focus to do so.
Where do you see the Zeitgeist movement 1 year from now? Where would you like to see it?
I don't really think about it that way.
No?
I guess, well, where would I like to see it? Where I see it, I don't know. But where I'd like to see it, I suppose, would be a nice, organized system with pockets of memberships and activists working educational groups all over the planet, hopefully relatively equidistant. So when you look at, say, a map of the planet and you were to look at the population of those that are in the movement, you'd have these tremendous spots everywhere. And then slowly through time, it will emerge. The point being, slowly through time, that it will emerge and everything will slowly come together. And the establishment will be absolutely horrified. of all governments. All governments will say, what is going on? We've been trying to promote ourselves and keep our patriotism and keep our industries against all these other damn governments. Now we have this sub-movement that wants to unify the world and have the world work together. And it's going to be difficult from that angle. But the beauty of this approach, the way I see it, is that it is less susceptible to the type of horrors that we see that the establishment does. If there was ever an act of violence by a government against the Zeitgeist movement, other governments...
I was going to ask you about that, actually.
Other governments, this entire pool of people can jump into action. And the problem is the numbers necessary for that are quite extreme. You can't just do it with a couple hundred people in each city. It has to be a substantial relative amount of people. I hope it doesn't have to work out like that. I hope in some way that eventually these things will click, and you'll eventually get people that are fairly high up in the established structure to finally get turned around. And begin it so it doesn't have to be this utter, overthrow. I hate to think about it that way.
People are looking at you as some kind, I don't want to say saviour, that's totally the wrong word.
No.
But really for someone to start a new structure. And people who've done that in the past, some of them have come to a bit of a sticky end.
Well, sure, I think...
Are you worried that
I'm strategically countering that possibility because of the way that I'm trying to organize it as a global structure. And hopefully in 1 year from now, there will be other people like me. I have a thing on my site that's a lecture circuit, which I'm constructing, which will not just be me or Jacques or Roxanne. It will be anyone that learns this information to a high enough degree where they can go out and they can have events like this. And people will respect it, and they will become representatives. Everyone's a representative in some way, at least that's the way I like to think about it. It's the way I encourage people to think about themselves. It's too easy to pawn it off on some leader, some supposed leader, and that's a tendency people have too. Yes. They don't want to do anything, and they just pawn it off on somebody else, and that's definitely dangerous. But to take out anybody in the higher echelon of, say, any kind of movement, if the movement is holographic and to the extent where there's just people everywhere, then there's not even going to be a motivation to do so. So that's the balance that has to occur. I need a team of people, and I have a good number of them in different countries now. I'd say there's about 12 or 15 centralized groups that are doing autonomous things, and I think I well respect what they're doing. They seem to be on track, and they're in charge of their area, so to speak. So I think... and hopefully eventually
you're pleased with the way things are going? I
suppose it could be better, but it's a difficult learning threshold, and it's
a start, isn't
it? Yeah, and the organization, of course, as you can imagine, is very, very, very hard. Even just the website organization about how to deal with groups and figure out the most what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry, I'm a bit tired today.
I know.
The most relevant and logical way to do something, the easiest way, the path of least resistance to get an organization like this together is a massive mental conundrum.
Yes.
Because if you're dealing with a global activist community, so to speak, it has so many different variables and so many different people, and so this is an ongoing process. But I would, to answer your question, I'm fairly happy with it.
Your goal is true, and what you're trying to bring off is such a wonderful project.
I think so.
And I think something like this is going to take time, but we do hope that this is going to happen in the future.
And again, it's an attitude. People shouldn't be too high-strung about it.
Yes.
They should be serious about it. But I get a little discouraged when I meet people that are far too gung-ho.
Yes.
And because it can't work like that. You have to you live your life, and you have to look at this as a larger order project. You have to think about it in the way the early stonemasons built the huge cathedrals, where it took generations to build these massive, they accepted that. So they knew they weren't going to see the end of this cathedral by the time that they died. And while I don't like to throw out rhetoric that none of this can happen in one lifetime, I think, generally speaking, when it comes to value adaptations, it might take a lot longer than that. Doesn't mean we can't create a new society in the meantime that can solve a good amount of the problems and begin the transition.
Well, I think people are trying, aren't they? Because they're building solar energy and panels and wave energy and tidal energy.
Luckily, it's become a fad, oddly enough. There is a thing happening where the people, they realize there's problems in the environment. So you have all these companies promoting green ideas, green products. They're not really green if you look closely at most of them. But nevertheless, it's great because it's showing that the public is becoming somewhat aware.
Yes.
And even people are coming aware, even if there's certain environmental problems that aren't as relevant as people make them out to be. Regardless, it's planting a seed for people to start understanding that they are interconnected with the environment. An obvious truth that unfortunately most people have, like most obvious truths, they're the most profound, and they're the most lost, it seems. But